All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, you sent over a legal brief, and wow, it reads like a courtroom thriller.
Oh, this one is a doozy.
It is. It's about this lawyer, Robert DeCaleta, who got convicted, right, of conspiracy to commit immigration fraud.
Hmm.
And now he's appealing that conviction. So we're going to try to break this down, especially focusing on something called Brady violations, those moments when the prosecution might be holding back crucial info from the defense.
Yeah, and, the case Brady v. Maryland, that's where this whole principle comes from, right? It's super important to our justice system.
Yeah.
Like, it's all about making sure trials are fair. The prosecution has to reveal any evidence that could help the defense, evidence that could show they're innocent.
Totally. And to make this even more intriguing, this brief is saying that the government pretty much built their whole case against Decoleta based on what his former clients said. But here's the twist. These clients were going through their own immigration struggles, and they might have been offered some kind of perks or benefits in exchange for speaking up against him.
Definitely raises some red flags. I mean, when you hide information, especially when it has to do with potential benefits offered to witnesses, it throws the whole fairness of the trial into question.
Absolutely. So let's just rewind for a second. Decoleta was accused of helping his clients, right, to get asylum or other immigration benefits here in the U.S., but through dishonest means. Basically, the government's saying he was making up these persecution stories, making them sound more dramatic to beef up their applications, even if there wasn't any real danger back in their home countries.
Exactly. And at the heart of Decoleta's appeal is this idea that government knew, or should have known, that these client witnesses might have had their own reasons, their own agendas for testifying against him.
Reasons that go beyond just telling the truth.
Exactly. The brief alleges that these clients, and remember they got into the U.S. maybe through iffy applications themselves, were offered a bunch of benefits they didn't disclose. Things like, oh, you won't get deported, and hey, we'll even help you with your ongoing immigration cases.
Whoa, wait. So the people accusing Decoleta of helping them commit immigration fraud, they might have been given a pass by the government just to get their side of the story? That seems like a big deal.
Oh yeah, it raises a ton of questions. The brief makes it clear none of these clients, even though they admitted to immigration fraud, none of them were deported. And get this, some of them got significant help navigating the legal stuff, even direct advocacy from a Department of Homeland Security agent, Tony Chesla.
Chesla, that name keeps coming up. What's his deal? What was he doing?
Well, this brief is saying that what Chesla was doing went way beyond what you'd expect from, your average law enforcement guy. Apparently, he contacted some bigwigs, high-ranking immigration officials, to fast-track certain benefits for these very witnesses. He even jumped in to stop one witness from being deported, someone ICE had detained.
Wow, that does sound like he was pulling some strings. But hold on, isn't it okay to help someone after the trial's over? I mean, couldn't the government say they were just being, I don't know, compassionate, trying to help folks who had been through a lot?
That's where it gets tricky. Providing help after the fact, that's not illegal in itself, but it makes you wonder. Was there some kind of unspoken agreement beforehand? If these witnesses knew going into the trial that they had a guy in the government, someone who'd help them out with their immigration problems, well, that's a big incentive to testify in a way that pleases the prosecution, don't you think?
Totally. It's like a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing, right? If they play along, they might get a solution to their very uncertain immigration status. That seems like information that should have been shared with Decoleta's defense team.
And that's precisely the brief's point.
Yeah.
They never told the defense about this insider advantage, creating a huge power imbalance. The government was all, oh, these witnesses have no reason to lie, but come on, this whole hidden understanding could have swayed their testimony massively.
Okay, so we've got potential benefits being dangled, maybe a favor for a favor situation, and a defense team kept in the dark. But did any of this actually affect the outcome of the trial? Could this really be the reason a conviction gets tossed out?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
To figure that out, we have to dig into this idea of materiality when it comes to Brady violations. So Brady says the prosecution has to hand over evidence that's good for the defense, right? But this information, it also has to be material, meaning it had a real chance of changing the trial's result.
So I'm guessing the judge who looked at Decoleta's appeal, he didn't think this information was material enough.
You got it. The judge acknowledged that, yeah, Chesla did help out after the trial, and even hinted that Chesla's might have been involved in something shady. But his final ruling: the undisclosed information wasn't strong enough to justify a whole new trial. He pointed to other evidence, stuff like what the interpreter said, and a recording where Dekalaitis seems to be telling a client to lie. He thought those things had more influence on the guilty verdict.
So even though there were all these behind-the-scenes deals going on, the judge felt like there was enough other evidence to say, yeah, Decalaida is guilty.
That's the gist. But the judge's decision doesn't erase the big questions this case brings up. Questions about how prosecutors should act, the power dynamics in immigration cases. Oh man, it's a lot. And it gets even more complicated when we look at what happened to Dekalaida's clients after the trial. Their stories are wild. This brief really dives into the lives of some of those clients, those witnesses, after they testified against Dekalaida. Remember, these are people who already admitted they committed immigration fraud themselves.
Yeah, it makes you think, shouldn't being part of this scheme, shouldn't that have messed up their own immigration status?
Right.
What happened after the trial? Were they deported?
That's where things get really interesting. Years after Dekalaida's trial, not one of these clients, those witnesses, had been deported. Some even got more immigration benefits even after admitting they committed fraud.
Whoa, hold on. How is that even possible?
Well, the brief suggests that Agent Chesla, remember him?
Oh, yeah, he's like a main character at this point.
Right. He stayed super involved in their lives, like going to bat for them with the immigration authorities.
Like, what do you mean? Give me an example. How was he helping them?
Okay, so there's this one client, Rawa Jabrail.
Okay.
She needed to renew her Swedish passport, but the name on her green card, it didn't match her passport.
Oh, that's a problem.
Big problem. Agent Chesla steps in, contacts officials, tries to make the process smoother for her.
So he's using his position to help someone who admitted to, what, lying on their immigration application?
Seems that way. And it goes even further. The brief alleges that Chesla also looked into bringing back an old visa petition from Jabrail's father, which, could have given her a legal way to stay here, totally separate from that asylum claim she got fraudulently.
It's like, wow, okay. He really went above and beyond for these clients. Did any of them actually face deportation?
Let's look at Sabamosa. This guy was granted withholding of removal, which lets someone stay in the U.S. even if they can't get asylum. But his withholding of removal, it was based on a fraudulent asylum application. Yeah. So in 2017, ICE detained him during a big ol' arrest operation.
I bet that was scary.
Yeah, sure.
So his family, they knew about his connection to Chesla, so they reach out to him desperate, help us.
And Chesla swoops in to save the day.
Well, according to the brief, Chesla called ICE, and guess what? Mosa's released from detention like 2 days later.
That's fast.
Right. But here's the thing. The judge in Dekalaida's appeal, he pointed out that Mosa was actually legally entitled to be released because of that withholding of removal status.
But wasn't the issue that he got that status fraudulently? Shouldn't that have raised some red flags for ICE?
Exactly. And that's what the brief is getting at. It says Chesla never told ICE that Mosa's status was based on fraud. And get this, the ICE officer who dealt with Mosa's case, he actually testified that if he knew about the fraud, he would have started deportation proceedings.
So Chesla might have actually kept Mosa from being deported by not telling ICE the whole truth. That's a pretty heavy accusation. And it gets even more interesting. Chesla claimed he'd help anyone in this kind of situation, not just witnesses, right? But the thing is, only these specific people, the ones who testified against Dekalaita, they were the only ones who got this special treatment.
That does seem kind of fishy. Okay, let's talk about Rafida Jabo Cordova.
Okay.
She's the client who first reported Dekalaita. What happened with her case after the trial?
Jabo Cordova's story takes a wild turn. So she testified that she came into the U.S. illegally from Canada using her sister's passport.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so after the trial, she decides she wants to try for permanent residency through her husband, Francisco Cordova. He's a U.S. citizen now.
But wouldn't coming here illegally before, wouldn't that be a huge roadblock to getting permanent residency? I mean, you can't just pretend that didn't happen.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But this is where it gets shady. Instead of admitting she came in illegally, Jabo Cordova and her lawyer, this Dalia Kejbu, they changed the story. They claimed she was just waved through at the border.
So they straight up lied on her application.
Yeah. That's what the brief is saying. And guess who pops up again? Agent Chesla.
Oh, I bet I know. He was involved.
Yep. The brief says that Kejbu, the lawyer, sent drafts of Jabo Cordova's application to Chesla for his feedback, for him to review. And even though Chesla knew this wave-through story was bogus, he didn't say a word.
He just, went along with it, knowing it was a lie.
Seems that way. Even the judge who reviewed Dekalaita's appeal, he called it Chesla's tacit approval of this whole fraudulent application.
Yeah.
He actually said straight up that both Jabo Cordova and Chesla weren't credible in their testimony.
So not only did Chesla maybe help cover up Jabo Cordova's past immigration fraud, but he might have helped her commit a whole new one. That's messed up.
It is, and it raises the question, what was Chesla really up to? Was this a one-time thing or a pattern of behavior?
What did the judge think about Chesla's actions? Do we have any concerns?
The judge did say that Chesla went above and beyond, like way beyond what a normal law enforcement officer would do to help these witnesses. He even said that Chesla probably planned to help them all along, but just avoided making any actual promises beforehand.
But isn't that kind of splitting hairs? If Chesla knew he was going to help them and they knew he was their guy, wouldn't they have assumed they were getting special treatment anyway?
That's exactly what Decoleta's lawyers argued. They said this unspoken understanding, this insider advantage, it had the same effect as an actual promise, and the defense should have known about it.
So the judge was saying, on one hand, Chesla probably planned this all along, but then he's also saying the witnesses didn't really know what they'd get, so it wasn't a Brady violation. Huh.
Yeah, it's complicated, right? But in the end, the judge went with the government side. He did say, though, that the witnesses knew they could go to Chesla for help, and that created this understanding that he'd be their insider on immigration stuff.
Man, this is so messy. We're talking about potential immigration fraud, a government agent maybe helping with that fraud, and the legal system trying to figure out what it all means. It's a lot.
It really makes you think about power and justice and the things people do when their own interests are at stake. And it leaves us with so many unanswered questions.
Speaking of unanswered questions, what happened to Decoleta? Did his appeal work? Did his conviction get overturned? So did Decoleta win his appeal? Did the conviction get overturned?
Well, the judge decided to deny the appeal. He said the information about what Chesla did, that wasn't material enough to change the conviction. He focused more on the other evidence from the trial, like what the interpreter said, and that recording of Decoleta maybe telling Jabo Cordova to lie.
So even though there was all that shady stuff going on with the witnesses, the judge felt there was still enough evidence to uphold the conviction.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex decision. And it's important to note that Decoleta's legal team, they're not giving up. They're actually appealing this ruling, saying that the judge got key parts of the evidence wrong and that the stuff about Chesla should have been disclosed, no question.
So this whole thing isn't over yet. But even if Decoleta's conviction stands, this whole story is just, I don't know, unsettling. It feels like getting that conviction might have become more important than having a fair and impartial trial, you know?
I get that.
Right.
It really highlights how critical it is to have a strong defense team that's really on top of things.
Mm.
Decoleta's lawyers had to fight so hard to find out what the government was doing with the witnesses. It makes you wonder how many other cases out there, how many people might be getting a raw deal simply because they can't afford a good lawyer or don't know how to push back against the prosecution's story.
It's scary to think about. I mean, the system is supposed to work so that you're innocent until proven guilty, but it often feels like the defendant is the one who has to do all the proving.
And that feeling, it's even stronger in immigration cases because there's so much power imbalance. Think about it. You've got people who might not speak English well, who don't understand all the legal jargon, and they're constantly afraid of being deported. They're super vulnerable. And it seems like that vulnerability might have been exploited here.
It's like a perfect storm for injustice. It makes it so hard to get a fair shake. But shouldn't the prosecution, shouldn't they be responsible for making sure the trial is fair? Shouldn't they have just told everyone about the possible benefits for the witnesses, even if the defense didn't ask?
That's the heart of the Brady rule, right? The prosecution has to hand over anything that could help the defense, whether they think it's important or not. They don't get to decide what the defense sees.
So is this prosecutorial misconduct then? Or just a bunch of mistakes?
Hard to say for sure what was going on in the prosecutors' heads. But you have to wonder, when you see how far Chesla went to hide his help for the witnesses, it makes you think, was this deliberate? Did they try to hide information that could have helped Decoleta?
It's like, did they want a conviction so badly that they forgot about actual justice?
It's a valid concern. The desire to win a case shouldn't come at the expense of basic fairness. And while this judge ruled in favor of the government, this case leaves us with these nagging questions. Did Decoleta really get a fair shot?
This might seem like just a legal drama, something far removed from most people's lives. Why should the average person care about this whole immigration fraud case?
Because, even though it seems like an isolated thing, this case tells us something about the health of our justice system. If the government can twist things or hide evidence, And if witnesses can be persuaded to testify with promises of rewards, then can any of us be sure we'd get a fair shake in court?
Right. It reminds you that even with all the rules and procedures, the legal system is still run by people. People with biases and pressures and temptations.
And those pressures are amplified in immigration cases.
Right.
Think about the fear and uncertainty people face in that system, especially when the government has so much power over them. It's really something to consider.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that justice isn't just about following the rules, but about being fair, giving everyone a real chance to defend themselves no matter their situation.
So as you're thinking about this case, ask yourself this. In a world where information equals power, how can we make sure everyone has that information? How can we hold the people in charge accountable? And how do we create a system that actually delivers on the promise of equal justice for all?
Big questions. We'll include resources and links in the show notes for anyone who wants to learn more about Brady violations, immigration law, and the fight for a fairer legal system.
And one last thought to chew on. Dekalita's story, it might seem like a unique situation, but it points to bigger issues we all need to think about. What other systems in our society might be open to manipulation or where power gets abused? It's a question worth pondering. It's a conversation we all need to be part of.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.